Hello, everyone, and welcome to Silent Kane. I'm Kane, your guide through stories of mystery, danger, and the hidden truths of the underworld. Let's begin today's case. The city had no name on the maps tourists bought at the airport. It was a sprawl of concrete, neon, and secrets, where crime didn't just live in the shadows, it owned them. In the back rooms of smoke-filled clubs, under the flicker of broken street lamps, deals were made in whispers, and debts were paid in blood. The law existed here only as an abstract concept, a word thrown around by politicians, not a shield that could protect the innocent. That it was in this city that Silas Kane made his home, or perhaps, more truthfully, his prison. A detective by trade, but not the kind who wore badges and filed reports. Kane was a man who dealt in truths too ugly for courtrooms, truths that bled through the cracks of polite society. He had no official authority, only a reputation, a lone figure willing to walk into the underworld where most men prayed never to step. People who hired Kane usually did so with desperation in their eyes. He didn't get cases about missing pets or insurance fraud. No, his clients came to him because they had nowhere else to turn. Sometimes it was a mother looking for her vanished daughter. Sometimes it was a businessman whose partners were slowly turning up dead. Sometimes it was someone already knee-deep in the criminal world, trying to survive one more day. But Kane was not in this line of work for money alone. Something in his past, something he rarely spoke of, kept him tethered to the city's darkest corners. Every case he took pulled him deeper, brushing against old wounds he had learned to live with but never let heal. He had enemies in places most people didn't even know existed, and allies whose loyalty could only be measured in shades of gray. The case that would come to be known as the mysterious blood letter began on a night like any other, if nights in this city could ever be called ordinary. A murder had been committed, but this one was different. There was no ransom, no robbery, no gangland message left behind. Only a single piece of paper, stained with a deep crimson blot, and words scrawled in a handwriting that felt like a whisper from another time. The letter did not simply mark the death. It promised more. It hinted at a chain of events stretching back decades, to a conspiracy buried so deep even the most ruthless crime lords have forgotten, or pretended to forget, it ever happened. But Kane couldn't forget, because he had seen something like it before. From the docks reeking of salt and diesel to the glittering penthouses where champagne masked the smell of fear, Kane would follow the trail. It would lead him through betrayals, gunfights, and deals made over the corpses of better men. Friends would become suspects, enemies would offer unexpected truths, and at every turn, the blood letter would reappear, each time revealing just enough to keep him moving forward. The truth lay somewhere ahead, cloaked in lies and guarded by people who had killed for far less. And Kane knew, as he always did, that the only way to reach it was to keep walking into the dark. The waterfront never truly slept. Even at 3 in the morning, the air carried the smell of salt, diesel, and stale beer. Ships lay docked like sleeping giants, their dark hulls towering over the cracked concrete piers. The sound of water slapping against the pilings mixed with the distant growl of engines somewhere beyond the fog. A single sodium street lamp flickered near the edge of Pier 7, painting the mist in a sickly orange glow. Silas Kane stood just outside that circle of light, his back against the rusted wall of an abandoned warehouse. His cigarette burned low between his fingers, a thin coil of smoke curling into the damp air. He had been here for almost an hour, long enough for the cold to seep into his bones and for his instincts to remind him that nothing good ever happened at a dockside meeting after midnight, that he'd been told to wait. The man who had called him, someone Kane only knew as Mr. Doyle, claimed to have information about a recent killing down in the Old Market District. Doyle's voice on the phone had been thin and urgent, the kind that came from someone looking over their shoulder as they spoke. He'd insisted this couldn't be handled in an office or a diner or anywhere the walls had ears, which was why Kane now found himself staring into the kind of fog that could hide anything. A lover's whisper or the barrel of a gun, a sharp clang echoed somewhere to his left. He tensed, shifting his weight slightly, his right hand brushing against the inside of his coat where the cold metal of his revolver rested. Kane didn't believe in coincidences, especially not here. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, crunching against gravel. A figure emerged from the mist, tall and thin, wearing a long coat that hung like a shadow. Doyle, Kane assumed. But before either man could speak, the night shattered point, two more shapes appeared behind Doyle, darker than the fog, moving fast. One reached for him, and Doyle barely had time to turn his head before a muffled pop cracked the silence. Doyle jerked once, then collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest that Kane's gun was in his hand before the second shot rang out. The bullet whined past his ear and struck the metal wall behind him with a hollow clang. He stepped sideways, crouching low, the revolver steady despite the adrenaline pounding through him. The first man lunged for Doyle's coat pocket, probably whatever the poor bastard had brought for Kane, and Kane fired. The shot caught the attacker in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The second man didn't hesitate. He bolted back into the fog, disappearing like smoke. Kane moved quickly. Doyle was on his side, gasping, eyes wide and glassy. Blood seeped between his fingers. Kane knelt beside him, his free hand pressing against the wound. "Stay with me," he muttered. "Who sent you?" Doyle's lips trembled, a faint trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. "Letter," he whispered. His hand moved weakly toward his coat pocket. Kane reached in and found a folded piece of paper, its edges stiff and sticky. A blot of dark red stained the center, the blood letter. Before Kane could say anything else, Doyle's gaze went distant and his chest stilled. Kane knew there was no point checking for a pulse. Somewhere in the fog, footsteps splashed against the wet pier, reinforcements, or maybe the shooter coming back to finish the job. Kane slipped the letter into his coat, rose to his feet, and backed away toward the shadows. The waterfront wasn't the place to fight a war alone, not when you didn't know how many were coming for you. That'd be why the time the first blue flash of police lights cut through the mist, Kane was gone. The streets away from the docks were quieter, but not by much. A city like this never gave you complete silence. Neon signs buzzed over late-night pawn shops. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Unrelated, probably, but in Kane's line of work, everything felt connected. He walked with purpose, though not hurried. People noticed a man in a rush. His office was 6 blocks away, tucked above a shuttered tailor shop on an avenue the city had forgotten. The building smelled faintly of mothballs and mildew, and the paint on the stairwell walls peeled in curling strips. Inside, Kane's office looked exactly how he liked it. Dim, cluttered, and locked. He closed the blinds before turning on the desk lamp. The letter lay on the wood, like it had been waiting for this moment. He unfolded it carefully, aware of the drying blood that smudged the fibers. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, almost elegant. It read, "The truth sleeps beneath the third stone. When it wakes, the city will burn again." No name, no date, no explanation. Kane leaned back in his chair, cigarette in hand, staring at the words. The phrasing was theatrical, almost poetic, but the weight in Doyle's voice before he died told Kane it wasn't a riddle for fun. The third stone could mean anything: a grave marker, a building cornerstone, something hidden in plain sight. And burn again, that suggested a fire, literal or otherwise, that had already scorched the city once. The Kane's mind ticked through the possibilities. 15 years ago, there had been the Iron Quarter fire. 5 warehouses and 3 city blocks turned to ash in one night. Officially blamed on faulty wiring. Unofficially, there had been whispers of arson linked to a smuggling war. If this letter tied to that, it meant whoever was behind it had waited a long time to resurface. His phone rang, slicing through the haze of thought. Kane hesitated before answering. Only a handful of people had this number, and most of them were either already dead or owed him money. "Yeah," he said. "You were at the docks tonight," a low voice replied. Not a question, an accusation. Depends who's asking. "A friend," the voice said. "One who thinks you just stepped into something you don't understand." Kane smiled without humor. "Story of my life." "You've got the letter," the voice continued. "That means they'll come for you. And it won't stop." The line went dead. Kane stared at the silent receiver for a moment before setting it back in its cradle. Whoever that was They knew about the letter before the blood on it had even dried. That meant one of two things. Either they were close enough to the docks to see what happened, or they had someone watching him. Neither option sat well, but he lit another cigarette, letting the smoke curl up toward the ceiling. The letter lay open under the desk lamp circle of light, the red blotch catching the yellow glow. He'd seen a share of death threats, ransom notes, coded messages, but this felt different. Not a demand, not an ultimatum. More like a prophecy. The third stone, he pulled open the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a battered city map, the kind you had to unfold like origami. The paper was soft at the creases from years of use. Kane spread it out, running a finger over the waterfront, then the old iron quarter, then the cemetery district. Anywhere with stones, anywhere that might hide a secret, a faint tap on the glass broke his focus. His office window overlooked a narrow alley between his building and the next. The blinds were down, but he could see the shadow of someone standing just beyond them. Kane's pulse quickened, though his face stayed calm. Without making a sound, he slid his revolver across the desk until it was within reach. Another tap, this time softer, like the person was trying not to be heard by anyone else. Kane moved to the window, keeping his gun low. He lifted the blind just enough to see outside that a girl stood in the alley, no more than 20, her dark hair plastered to her face from mist. She looked like she'd been running. Her coat hung open, and her eyes darted back and forth, checking the shadows. In her hand was something small and metallic. When she saw Kane's face in the window, she motioned urgently. Against his better judgment, Kane opened the side door that led down to the alley. The girl slipped inside quickly, shutting it behind her. She was breathing hard, the metal object still clutched in her fist. "You're Silas Kane?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who's asking?" "They killed Doyle," she said. Kane didn't react outwardly. "I noticed. What's your connection?" "I was supposed to meet him tonight," she replied. He said he had something for you. Something dangerous." She held out the object, a key, old and brass, with the number 3 carved into the head. Kane took it, weighing it in his palm. "The number. The third stone. Where'd you get this?" he asked. "Doyle gave it to me yesterday. Told me if anything happened to him, I had to find you." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I didn't think it would be so soon." Kane studied her. She had the look of someone who'd seen just enough of the city's dark side to know it could swallow her whole. But she wasn't lying. Not yet, anyway. "What's your name?" "Marla. You have somewhere safe to stay, Marla." She shook her head. Kane exhaled slowly. He hated involving civilians, especially young ones. They were unpredictable, emotional, and often got themselves killed before they could be of any real help. But if she had the key, she was already a target. "Fine," he said. "You'll stay here tonight. In the morning, we figure out what this opens." Marla glanced at the desk. "Is that the letter?" Kane's eyes narrowed. "You know about it. Just what Doyle told me. That it's older than it looks, and people will kill for it." The rain started sometime after midnight, drumming against the window like a slow heartbeat. Kane sat in the worn leather chair by the desk, cigarette smoke hanging around him like a ghost. Marla had taken a couch, curled up under a blanket he'd thrown her. She was asleep now, or pretending to be. He turned the brass key over in his fingers. Keys were like promises. They only mattered if you knew what they opened. The number 3 could mean anything. An apartment, a storage locker, a safe deposit box. But paired with the letter's reference to a third stone, it felt like more than coincidence. At T2:14 a.m., his phone rang again. This time, Kane almost didn't answer. "You've still got it," the same voice said. "Good. That means they haven't found you yet. You're going to have to get more specific," Kane replied. "Who's that?" The voice hesitated. "The ones who started the fire. 15 years ago. They're back." Kane's jaw tightened. "Why now?" "Because what they were hiding is about to be found. And you know this how?" But the line had already gone dead. Kane didn't sleep. By sunrise, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and silver. Marla stirred on the couch, blinking against the pale light creeping through the blinds. "We're going for a walk," Kane told her. Bring the key. Where to? She asked. Pier 7. She frowned. That's where Doyle. That's where we start, Kane said. The docks were quieter in daylight, though not by much. Men in heavy coats moved crates with the weariness of people who'd been doing the same work for decades. Kane led Marla past them, to the far end where the pier jutted out like a finger into the gray water. I could see the base of one of the bollards. Partly hidden by a loose stone in the pier's edge, Kane found a small metal plate. Stamped into it was the same number. He glanced at Marla, then knelt and inserted the key. The lock clicked. The plate lifted to reveal a narrow compartment beneath, just big enough for a rolled-up oilskin bundle. Kane pulled it out, the damp air heavy with the smell of salt and rust. Inside the bundle was a photograph, black and white, edges frayed. It showed 6 men standing in front of a burning warehouse, their faces half lit by the flames. One of them was Doyle. Another, Kane recognized instantly that IT was a man he'd thought was dead. Kane stared at the photograph longer than he meant to, his fingers tightening around the curling edges. The man on the far right, tall, with a thick trench coat and a face like weathered stone, wasn't supposed to exist anymore. His name was Victor Drager, a ghost from the old smuggling wars. 15 years ago, Drager's crew had been at the center of the Iron Quarter fire. Rumor had it he died in the blaze, trapped inside one of the burning warehouses. Kane had seen the reports, read the statements, even stood over the char body they said was Drager's. But if this photo was real, and every detail in the grainy image told Kane it was, then Drager had walked away from that fire alive. And if he'd stayed hidden this long, there was only one reason he'd resurfaced now. Kane. Marla's voice broke into his thoughts. She was looking past him, her eyes wide. Kane turned. 2 men in dark coats were walking down the pier toward them. They weren't dock workers, too clean, too deliberate in their stride. One had his hands in his pockets, but Kane could see the bulge of a shoulder holster under the fabric. Pocket the photo, Kane said quietly. Marla obeyed without question. Kane closed the metal plate and locked it, slipping the key into his coat. Then he straightened, stepping forward to meet the approaching men halfway. The taller of the two stopped a few feet away. Silas Kane, he said, his voice even but carrying the weight of someone used to giving orders. You've got something that doesn't belong to you. Funny, Kane replied. That's exactly what I was going to say to you. The man's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. This isn't a request. Kane's eyes flicked between them. If you were here to kill me, you'd have done it already. So what's stopping you? We were told to bring you in alive, the man said. Don't make us change the arrangement. Kane took a slow step back, angling himself so Marla was behind him. I'm not in the habit of going anywhere with strangers. The shorter man reached inside his coat. Kane didn't wait to see what came out. He grabbed Marla's wrist and pulled her sideways between 2 stacked crates. A shout followed, then the sharp crack of a gunshot, which splintered inches from his head. They ran. The pier turned into a blur of motion and noise. Shouts from dock workers, the thud of boots on wet planks, the metallic clatter of something being knocked over. Kane led Marla down a narrow gangway between 2 warehouses, his mind mapping the escape routes he'd memorized years ago. Another shot rang out, ricocheting off the corrugated metal wall. Marla stumbled, and Kane caught her by the arm, dragging her forward. They burst out into a side street, the sound of pursuit close behind. A delivery truck was parked at the curb, engine idling. The driver, an older man with a cigarette dangling from his mouth, barely had time to protest before Kane yanked the passenger door open. Drive, Kane ordered, shoving Marla inside ahead of him. Hey, what the hell, drive, or the men with guns will be your problem too. The driver swore but slammed the truck into gear. The tires squealed against the wet pavement as they pulled away from the pier. In the side mirror, Kane saw the two men emerge from the alley, one of them lifting a pistol that a shot cracked. The truck's rear window shattered, glass spraying across the seat. Faster! Kane barked. The driver didn't need telling twice. They sped through the industrial district, weaving between potholes and stacks of shipping containers, until the pier and its hunters were swallowed by distance. And FOG by the time they reached the edge of the old market district. The truck's engine was rattling like it might give out. Kane paid the driver enough to keep his mouth shut, then got out with Marla. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "Who were those men?" "The kind who don't stop," Kane said. They walked the rest of the way to his office. Kane locked the door behind them and drew the blind again. The photograph went on the desk alongside the blood letter. Together, they painted an ugly picture, a conspiracy that had somehow survived fire, time, and death. "Victor Drager," Kane said aloud, testing the name. "You know him?" Marla asked. "Knew him," Kane corrected. "Or thought I did. He was supposed to be dead." Marla stared at the photograph. "If he's alive, what does he want?" Kane didn't answer. He was thinking about the fire again, about the way it had gutted an entire district and left the city with more questions than bodies. If Drager had been pulling strings back then, he might still be doing it now. And if the blood letter was right, if the truth was about to wake, then Drager wouldn't be the only ghost crawling out of the past. The phone rang for the third time that night. "No, morning now." Kane picked it up without hesitation. "You're moving too slowly," the same low voice said. "They're closing in. Then maybe you should stop playing games and tell me who you are." A pause. Then, "I'm the one who lit the fire." The line went dead. That was the kind of confession you didn't get over the phone unless someone wanted you to do something about it. And in Kane's experience, that something usually ended with blood. He looked at Marla. "We're going to need answers. And I know exactly where to start." "Where?" "The only person still alive who was there the night the iron quarter burned." "Beside Drager?" Kane nodded once. "And he's not going to be happy to see me." The city was just waking when Kane and Marla stepped out into the thin, pale light. The streets still carried the damp breath of last night's rain, and a cold wind slid between the buildings, carrying the smell of wet brick and exhaust. Kane had left the photograph and the blood letter locked in his desk drawer, along with the brass key. Too dangerous to carry them right now. If someone came after them, he didn't want all the pieces in one place. The man they were going to see lived in a part of the city where sunlight never quite reached, an aging quarter of narrow lanes and leaning buildings, where laundry lines stretched like spiderwebs between windows and the gutters overflowed even in dry weather. People called it the Hollow, and the name fit. His name was Elias Crow. Once, he'd been a dock foreman, well known for moving crates faster than the union paperwork could catch up. But 15 years ago, the fire had taken everything from him: his job, his friends, his left leg from the knee down. He disappeared into the Hollow afterward, the kind of man who survived by being too insignificant for anyone to bother killing. Kane hadn't spoken to Crow in years. But Crow had been there the night the iron quarter burned, and that made him valuable now. They found him in a dim cafe that smelled faintly of boiled cabbage and old coffee. Crow sat alone at a corner table, his crutch leaning against the wall beside him, a chipped mug between his hands. He looked older than Kane remembered, deep lines in his face, hair gone the color of ash, but his eyes were sharp. "You've got nerve, Kane," Crow said without preamble as they approached. "You show up here after all this time, and you bring company?" "She's with me," Kane replied. "Marla." Crow gave her a curt nod, then looked back at Kane. "What do you want?" "Answers." Kane slid into the chair opposite him. "About the fire." Crow's gaze didn't waver, but his grip on the mug tightened. "That's old news. Not to the people dying over it now," Kane said. "Doyle's dead. Shot last night. He was carrying this." He didn't take out the letter. No sense waving it around in public. But Crow's eyes narrowed at the mention. "So it's surfaced again. You know what it is?" Kane asked. "I know enough to stay away from it," Crow replied. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "That letter, it's not just a warning. It's a contract." Kane frowned. "Contract for what?" Crow hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the window as if expecting someone to be watching. "For silence. 15 years ago, 6 men signed it in blood, literal blood. It bound them together, made sure no one talked about what really caused that fire. And if one of them broke the pact, they died." Kane finished for him. Crow nodded. "The letter is the trigger. Once it's sent, it means one of the 6 is about to be silenced, permanently." Kane's mind went back to the photograph, to Doyle standing among those 6 men, to Drager's face in the flames. Who were they? Crow's voice dropped even further. "Dokbuses. Smugglers. Politicians with their hands in all the wrong pockets. Drager was the one who held them together. When a fire came, we all thought he went with it. But he didn't." Kane said. "No," Crow said. "And if he's behind this, you'd better start planning your funeral." The door to the cafe opened, letting in a gust of cold air and 2 men in dark coats. Kane recognized the build, the way they scanned the room without really moving their heads. The same type that had been on the pier. "We're leaving," Kane said, standing. Crow looked up sharply. "You led them here?" "Not intentionally." Kane reached into his coat, fingers brushing the grip of his revolver. "Back door." Crow jerked his head toward the kitchen. Kane motioned to Marla, and they moved quickly, weaving between tables as the 2 men crossed the threshold. They slipped into the narrow hallway behind the kitchen, the smell of frying onions thick in the air. A cook shouted something in a language Kane didn't recognize as they pushed through the back door into an alley. Cold daylight poured down between the brick walls. Kane heard footsteps pounding behind them. "This way," he said, leading Marla down the alley and cutting left at a chain-link fence. Crow was slower, his crutch thumping against the uneven pavement, but he kept up as the shot rang out. Kane felt the wind of it pass his ear. They ducked behind a dumpster, Kane drawing his revolver. The alley was too narrow for a clean escape, and he could hear the men getting closer. The Crow's voice was tight. "You can't lead them to me, Kane. If they know I talked, they already know," Kane said. The first man rounded the corner, gun raised. Kane fired once, catching him in the shoulder. He staggered back, cursing. The second man took cover behind the fence. "Move." Kane barked. They ran again, this time bursting out into a wider street. Traffic blared horns as they crossed in front of Taxi. Kane didn't stop until they were 3 blocks away, ducking into the shadowed doorway of a boarded-up shop. Crow's breathing was ragged. "You've just painted a target on all of us. Then you'd better tell me the rest before it's too late," Kane said. To Crow's eyes flicked to Marla, then back to Kane. "There's a ledger. Drager kept it. Names, dates, amounts. Everything from the smuggling operations before the fire. If it comes out, half the city's power brokers will fall. That's why the 6 made the pact. And that's why they'll kill to keep it buried. Where's the ledger now? If I knew, I wouldn't still be breathing." Kane exhaled slowly. The key in his desk drawer suddenly felt heavier. Could be why the time they left Crow, the hollow had turned gray under thickening clouds. Kane's gut told him they were being followed, but he didn't turn a check. Better to get back to the office, regroup, figure out their next move. The streets narrowed as they got closer to his building. Kane kept Marla close, scanning doorways and rooftops. Halfway up the block, he froze. His office door, the one he'd locked that morning, was ajar. He drew his revolver and pushed the door open with his foot. Inside, the place was a mess. Drawers yanked open, paper scattered, the desk lamp knocked over. The photograph was gone. So was the brass key on the desk. In the same sharp handwriting as the blood letter was a single line on a torn scrap of paper. "The 3rd stone is no longer yours." Kane stared at the scrap of paper until the words blurred. The 3rd stone. It meant nothing. Yet it had been left with the precision of someone who wanted it to mean everything. Marla hovered in the doorway, scanning the ransacked office. "You keep anything here worth stealing?" "Not unless you count the 2 things they took," Kane said, his voice low. "They came for the photograph and the key. You think they knew you had them? They didn't toss the place like they were searching. They went straight to my desk drawer, which means somebody told them." Marla frowned. "Crow." Kane shook his head. "No." Crow's too busy trying to keep his heart beating. But we've been in the open all day. Could have been anyone watching us. He moved behind the desk, nudged the paper with the barrel of his revolver, then slipped it into his coat pocket. The weight of it was strange, like holding a puzzle piece from the wrong box. The third stone, Marla said quietly. Sounds like some kind of code. Or a location, Kane replied. And if it is, we're already a step behind. They didn't linger. Kane locked the office, knowing it was pointless. Whoever had been inside could come back whenever they wanted. But he wasn't in the mood to give them a second helping. Outside, the clouds had settled into a dull, low ceiling. The air felt heavy, threatening rain. Kane led Marla through a side street toward the river, keeping his head down. The pavement was slick, catching the glint of the street lamps, even in daylight. You know where to start with this? Marla asked. Maybe, Kane said. The phrase third stone isn't new to me. Years back, when I was chasing a smuggling ring on the East Docks, I heard it once. Drunk sailor mumbled something about the third stone past the iron post. Never could track what he meant. You think it's the same? I think Draeger's too clever to recycle metaphors. But maybe it's tied to the old dock markers. The kind they used before GPS made everyone lazy. Marla gave him a sidelong look. And how do you find a dock marker from 15 years ago? You ask someone who remembers. That meant going to see Nico, if Crow was a ghost from the past. Nico was a ghost who'd never stopped haunting the present. A dock worker turned fence. He'd made a career out of knowing what came in, what went out, and where the bodies got dropped when the tide was right. They found him in a warehouse that looked abandoned from the street. Peeling paint, busted windows, no sign of activity. Inside, it was a different story. Crates were stacked to the ceiling, the air thick with the smell of sawdust and motor oil. Nico stood near the far wall, clipboard in one hand, cigarette in the other. Kane, he said when they approached, voice dripping with both surprise and suspicion. To what do I owe the displeasure? Need some old dock history, Kane said. Specifically, the phrase third stone. Nico's brow furrowed. He took a drag on his cigarette. That's a relic. Back in the day, before the fire, the North Pier had iron posts set every 50 yards. Between them were paving stones, rough granite blocks, set in threes. The third stone was code for a drop point. You knew where to leave something, you knew where to pick it up. Never written down, just word of mouth. Kane leaned in. Still there. Nico shook his head. Pier's been rebuilt twice since then. But if you're talking about something hidden, sometimes they didn't mean the literal third stone. Sometimes it was the third marker along a wall, a fence, even inside a building. Depends who you were dealing with. Marla crossed her arms. So, it could be anywhere in the city. Nico smirked. If you're chasing Draeger, it could be anywhere in the country. And Kane, his voice dropped. You're playing a dangerous hand. I've heard whispers. Draeger's not sending those letters to scare people. He's sending them to remind the last survivors of their promise before cutting their throats. Kane met his gaze. And where would Draeger be doing his cutting these days? That, Nico said, stubbing out his cigarette, is something I don't want to know. They left without more answers, but Kane's mind was already piecing it together. If the phrase meant a drop point, then the note in his office was either telling him where to go or warning him where Draeger would strike next. Where to now? Marla asked as they reached the street. Back to the pier, Kane said. The old one, before they rebuilt. You think anything's left? Not much, but sometimes the city's memory runs deeper than concrete. The old pier was a skeleton now, its surface warped and splintered, iron posts rusting where they leaned. The water slapped lazily against the pylons, carrying the smell of salt and rot. Kane walked the length of it, counting posts, tracing where the stones would have been. It was near the end that he saw it. A slab of granite set into the wood, out of place among the planks. Weather-worn, chipped at the edges, but unmistakably stoned, he knelt, running his hand over the surface. There, faint but deliberate, was an engraving, a small circle with 3 slashes through it. "What is it?" Marla asked. "Marker," Kane said. "Could be the 3rd stone." He pried at the edges with his pocket knife. The slab shifted with a groan, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Kane lifted it out, unwrapping it to reveal a small metal box, no bigger than a cigar case. The lock was old but sturdy. Kane turned it over in his hands, weighing it. "Looks like it hasn't been touched in years." Then a voice behind him, "Put it back." Kane turned slowly. 3 men stood at the far end of the pier, all armed. The one in front was smiling. "You don't know what you're holding," the man said. "Maybe you should tell me," Kane replied. The smile widened. "Open it, and you'll wish Draeger got to you first." Rain began to fall, just a whisper at first, then harder, slicking the boards under Kane's boots. He backed toward the edge of the pier, Marla close behind, the box still in his hand. "Last chance," the man said. Kane's revolver was already in his other hand. "You'll have to take it from me." The first shot cracked the air, sending gulls screaming from the pilings. Kane dropped to one knee, firing back. Marla darted toward the piling, using it for cover. One of the gunmen went down, clutching his leg. The leader advanced, firing again. Kane rolled behind a stack of nets, rainwater dripping into his eyes. The box was slippery in his grip. Another shot, closer this time. Kane lunged sideways, returning fire. The leader staggered, his smile gone, then collapsed against the railing. The last man bolted into the rain. When the echoes died, Kane straightened, breathing hard. Marla emerged from cover, her hair plastered to her face. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah." Kane looked down at the box. The lock was dented from the fight. He flicked it open with his knife. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, stained at the edges. Kane unfolded it. In the same sharp handwriting as the blood letter, it read, "The ledger moves at midnight." 3rd stone was only the 1st. Below that, a date, today's date, and a location he knew all too well, the Glass Spire Hotel. Kane felt the city shift around him, the pieces of the game moving into place. Midnight was less than 8 hours away, and Draeger had just told him where to die. The Glass Spire Hotel didn't belong in Kane City. It looked like it had been dropped here by accident, some towering shard of wealth and polished steel meant for a skyline far from the waterfront's rock. 25 stories of tinted glass reflected a version of the city that didn't exist. No peeling paint, no rusting iron, no smell of diesel and brine. But Kane knew better. The Glass Spire wasn't just a hotel. It was a fortress for the kind of men who smiled in photographs while quietly ordering someone's lungs collapsed in an alley. And tonight, it was the stage for whatever Draeger had planned. Midnight was less than 8 hours away. 8 hours to figure out what the ledger was, why Draeger wanted it moved, and why Kane's name was now tangled in the mess. Marla trailed beside him as they stepped out of the rain and into the lobby. The air inside was warm, perfumed faintly with something expensive and artificial. A pianist in the corner played soft jazz for guests too distracted by their own reflections in the marble floors to listen. "You ever stayed here?" Marla murmured. "Not my kind of place," Kane said. "I don't like hotels where the staff can watch you without turning their heads." They crossed to the front desk. The clerk, thin, pale, with a smile like stretched linen, greeted them politely, his eyes skimming over Kane's damp coat with quiet disapproval. "Reservation?" the clerk asked. "Meeting," Kane replied. "Pivot Street. Name's Weller." The clerk's smile didn't flicker, but his fingers hesitated on the keyboard. "Mr. Weller is expecting you in the bar lounge. Right this way." The bar lounge sat half a floor up, tucked behind smoke glass partitions. Low light, low voices. Kane spotted Weller immediately. A heavy-set man in an immaculate navy suit, hair combed to perfection. He was flanked by 2 men who didn't bother to hide the bulge under their jackets. "Kane," Weller said, rising to shake his hand. Wasn't sure you'd come. You sent for me? Kane asked that Weller's lips twitched. Not exactly. Let's say a mutual acquaintance suggested I might have what you're looking for. Ledger, Kane said. Weller didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward a booth in the corner. Let's talk somewhere less visible. They slid into the booth. The noise of the lounge dulled to a murmur. Weller leaned forward. You've been sniffing around Drager, Weller said. That's dangerous business. But I think we might be able to help each other. I'm listening, Kane said. There's a ledger, Weller continued, lowering his voice. Not just any ledger. This one details transactions spanning 20 years. Drug shipments, arms deals, contract hits, names, dates, amounts. It's enough to sink every major outfit in the city, Drager included. And you have it? Not exactly, Weller said again. It's being moved tonight. My sources say Drager wants it under his control before anyone else realizes it still exists. But here's the thing. I don't want Drager to have it any more than you do. Marla raised an eyebrow. So what do you want? A partnership, Weller said simply. You intercept the ledger before Drager does. I get my cut of whatever leverage it brings. You get to keep Drager from tightening his grip on the city. Kane studied him. Weller's eyes were steady, but there was a faint twitch in his jaw, the kind of tell you saw in men who were calculating 3 exits while they talked. And if I say no, Kane asked, then you'll probably end up on a slab before sunrise, Weller said, smiling faintly. Drager doesn't leave loose ends. Kane hated deals like this. Ones that sounded just reasonable enough to make you forget how much of your soul you were about to sell. But the clock was ticking, and information was the only currency that mattered. Where's the drop? Kane asked. Alley behind Pierstone Market. 1 a.m. sharp. Package changes hands fast. You'll have maybe 30 seconds to act. Drager's people will be there, and they won't hesitate to kill you. Marla's hand slid to her coat pocket. Sounds like fun. They left the glass spire with more questions than answers. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the sodium lamps. Kane kept his collar up as they headed toward the market district. You believe him? Marla asked. I believe he wants Drager hurt, Kane said. Doesn't mean he's telling the whole truth. My guess? Weller's got his own people in play tonight, and he's hoping we're the ones who take the bullets while he swoops in for the prize. Nice guy. They're all nice guys until the knives come out. The market was a different beast at night. Stalls that sold fish and produced by day were now shuttered and dark, their awnings sagging with rainwater. Rats skittered through the gutters. Somewhere in the distance, a drunk sang badly to himself. Kane and Marla took up position in a recessed doorway across from the alley Weller had described. The mouth of it was choked in shadow, the kind of place you could disappear into without leaving a ripple. They waited. Minutes bled into each other. Kane's mind kept circling the box from the pier, the note inside. The way Drager seemed to be pulling him into the center of something much bigger than a simple vendetta. A T1:02 a.m. movement in the alley. A man in a gray overcoat stepped into view, a slim briefcase in one hand. Behind him, 2 others, muscle, no question. From the opposite side, another figure emerged, tall, thin, face hidden under a hat brim. Kane couldn't see his eyes, but the way he moved said he was in charge. The exchange was fast, too fast. Briefcase passed from one hand to the other. The man in the gray coat turned to leave. Kane stepped out of the doorway. Evening, he said. The reaction was immediate. Guns cleared leather. Marla ducked into cover. Kane fired first, the report echoing off brick walls. One of the muscle went down hard. The other sprayed bullets into the night, forcing Kane back against the wall. The briefcase carrier bolted. Kane gave chase, boots slapping through puddles. The alley narrowed, twisting. The man glanced back, panic flashing across his face. Drop it! Kane barked. The man didn't. He reached the end of the alley, slammed into a chain-link fence. Kane closed the gap, grabbed his arm, and wrenched the briefcase free. The man swung wildly, catching Kane in the ribs. Pain flared, but Kane shoved him back into the fence. Marla's voice rang out behind them. We've got company. 3 more men poured into the alley from the far end, all armed. Kane snapped the briefcase, shut, and ran. He and Marla darted through a side passage, the shouts of their pursuers echoing after them. They burst out onto a deserted street. Kane scanned for cover, spotted a delivery truck parked at the curb. They ducked behind it just as bullets tore into the pavement. Marla yanked open the truck's back door. They scrambled inside, slamming the door behind them. Darkness swallowed them whole, the smell of cardboard and diesel thick in the air. "You think we lost them?" Marla whispered. "For now," Kane said, breathing hard. "But they're not going to stop." They didn't speak again until the sounds of pursuit faded. Kane risked a look outside. The street was empty, but he set the briefcase on his lap, flicked the latches. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, its pages dense with columns of numbers, names, and locations. Kane flipped through quickly that IT was exactly what Weller had promised, and more. Some of the names here weren't just criminals. There were politicians, judges, cops, and in the margin of one page, written in the same sharp hand as the blood letter, were the words, "When not finished, Kane." Kane closed the ledger, the weight of it settling in his hands like a loaded gun. They were in deeper than ever, and Drager had just made it personal that Kane's jaw tightened as he snapped the ledger shut. He'd seen leverage before, but never concentrated like this. A city's entire nervous system, all its hidden transactions and guilty secrets, inked on fragile paper. It was the kind of thing men would kill for without hesitation. "Someone knew we'd open it tonight," Marla said, her voice low. "That note wasn't meant to spook you. It's a promise. Or a dare," Kane muttered. He didn't like thinking about how many eyes had been on them since the pier. Drager's reach wasn't just in street gangs and smugglers. It was in hotel lobbies, behind police desks, maybe even in the mayor's office. The ledger confirmed that much. The truck rattled as a gust of wind pushed against it, rain beginning again in sharp bursts. Kane exhaled slowly, weighing options. Staying in one place was suicide. Moving with the ledger was almost as dangerous. It was a glowing beacon for everyone in the city who'd heard whispers about its existence. "We can't bring this to Weller," Marla said, reading his mind. "He'll sell us out to the highest bidder." "No," Kane agreed, "but we can use him." They slipped out of the truck on a side street, half a mile from Pierstone. The rain had driven most people indoors, leaving the sidewalks slick and empty. Kane kept the briefcase close under his arm as they walked, eyes scanning windows and doorways. That Weller's office was in a converted warehouse 2 blocks from the market. Kane didn't plan to go inside. He needed Weller to think he'd failed, or at least that he didn't have the ledger yet. That would keep Weller's enemies guessing long enough for Kane to make the first move. They stopped in the shadow of a boarded-up storefront across from the warehouse. The glow of Weller's office lights bled through tall windows. Inside, silhouettes moved. One of them unmistakably Weller's bulk. "Think he already knows?" Marla asked. "He's guessing," Kane said. "And if he's smart, he's already arranging a meet with Drager to hedge his bets." They stayed only long enough to see 2 black sedans pull up to the warehouse. 4 men got out, moving with the smooth, confident precision of professionals. They weren't Weller's muscle. Too quiet, too disciplined. Drager's men. Kane's pulse ticked higher. The alleyway deal had been a test. Drager had probably been watching from the start, waiting to see who grabbed the bait. And now he knew. They moved fast, cutting through side streets until they reached Kane's safe house, a 2-room apartment above an abandoned tailor shop. The door locks were cheap, but Kane trusted the building's anonymity more than any reinforced safe house. Inside, the air was cold and faintly musty. Kane tossed the briefcase onto the small kitchen table, then stripped off his coat. Marla poured herself a drink from the bottle on the counter. "So, what's the plan?" Kane sat, flipping the ledger open again. "We'll make a pact," he said. "Not with Weller, not with Drager. With someone neither of them can buy off." "You're talking about Bishop?" Kane nodded. Bishop was a name spoken rarely and quietly. a fixer who operated entirely outside the city's criminal web. Bishop had no crew, no turf, and no loyalty except to the deals he made himself. If anyone could keep the ledger safe long enough for Kane to use it, it was him. But Bishop doesn't work for free, Marla said. No, Kane agreed. He works for survival. And right now, the ledger is the one thing that can guarantee his. It took 2 hours to make contact. Bishop answered on the third ring, his voice a gravelly drawl that carried the faintest amusement. Kane, I was wondering when you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in. I have something that changes the balance of the city, Kane said, and I need neutral ground talk. Silence. Then, warehouse at Bay and Linton. 2 hours. Come alone. Kane hung up. You're staying here, he told Marla. The hell I am. Bishop said alone. He means it. If he thinks I'm trying to sneak in backup, the deal's dead before it starts. Marla stared at him for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. Fine. But if you're not back by sunrise, I'm coming to dig you out. Bay and Linton was industrial dead space. A sprawl of shipping containers, rusted cranes, and half-collapsed warehouses. The one Bishop had chosen still had most of its roof intact. A single light burned inside, casting a thin beam through the rain. Kane stepped through the door. Bishop was there, lean and sharp-eyed, wearing a long coat that looked older than the building. His hair was silver at the temples, his hands steady as they rested on the table between them. You brought it, Bishop said. No greeting, no pretense. Kane set the briefcase down. You know what this is? I know it's why 3 separate crews have been asking questions about you since dawn, Bishop said. He flicked the latches, scanned a single page, and closed it again. You're holding the city's spine in your hands, Kane. Break it, and every predator here goes feral. That's why I need you, Kane said. Keep it safe. Keep it quiet. And when I say it's time, you get it into the hands of people who can use it without selling it to the highest bidder. And in return, Bishop asked, in return, you get to stay the one man in this city nobody can touch. Bishop studied him for a long moment. The rain drummed harder against the tin roof, filling the silence. Finally, Bishop smiled faintly. You've got yourself a pact, Kane, but if Draeger comes for you, and he will, you're on your own. I wouldn't have it any other way. They shook hands. Kane felt the cold weight of the agreement settle in his chest. As he stepped back into the rain, he knew 2 things for certain. The ledger was safe for now, and Draeger wouldn't stop until Kane was dead. And somewhere, in the shadows between them, the writer of the blood letter was still watching. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time Kane made it back to the safe house, but the streets still glistened under the yellow smear of sodium lights. The city seemed quieter, as if it were holding its breath. That silence didn't comfort Kane. It felt like the calm that comes before a building collapses. Marla was at the table with her boots up, a half-empty glass of whiskey in hand. Her eyes snapped to the door the second Kane walked in. Well, he took it, Kane said, locking the door behind him. Marla lowered her glass. And now it's off the street, for the moment. Kane shed his coat and hung it on the chair. The warmth of the room didn't touch him. We bought time. Not much. Draeger will know it's missing. And when he can't find it, he'll come for me. Marla's lips pressed into a thin line. So what's the next move? Kane crossed to the small sink, splashed cold water on his face, and stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above it. His eyes were dark, ringed with exhaustion, but alert, the eyes of a man who knew his next steps could decide whether he lived another day. We go to the top, he said finally. The top of what? The glass towers. Kane turned, drying his face on a dish towel. The ledger had entries tied to 2 corporations. Shell fronts, but big ones. Respectable names with gleaming lobbies and PR budgets that could drown a scandal. That's where the money's being washed. Marla frowned. You think Draeger's hiding behind them? No, I think he's feeding them. And if that's true, we find proof. We cut off his supply lines. The next morning, Kane and Marla walked into the financial district. Here the city shed its grime for a facade of mirrored walls and sharp suits. The towers rose like monuments to power, their glass faces reflecting a sky that was pretending it had never rained. The first building on Kane's list was the Hartwell Building. 50 stories of polished glass, steel, and ambition. Hartwell International was known for importing high-end electronics, but the ledger suggested it had another import entirely. Untraceable cash, funneled through offshore accounts and funneled back into Draeger's enterprises. Inside, the air was crisp and perfumed with some expensive, manufactured scent. The marble floor gleamed underfoot, and a security desk stood like an altar between visitors and the elevator banks. A uniformed guard looked up. "Can I help you?" "Deliveries," Kane said smoothly, holding up a padded envelope. "Hartwell Legal Department." The guard's eyes flicked to the envelope, then to Kane's face. After a moment, he waved them through. "Sign in." They took the elevator to the 34th floor. As the doors slid open, Kane caught the low hum of computers and the muted murmur of phone calls. The walls here were white and sterile, lined with glass-walled offices. Marla leaned toward him as they walked. "You really think we're just going to stroll in and find proof?" "No," Kane said. "We're going to make someone give it to us." Their target was a man named Colin Mercer, mid-level compliance officer, the kind of man who knew exactly where bodies were buried, but had no say in digging them up. People like Mercer didn't have power. They had information, and that made them dangerous to both sides. They found him in a corner office, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes glued to a spreadsheet. Kane knocked on the doorframe. Mercer looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "Can I help you?" "You can," Kane said. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk about the Iron Quarter accounts." Mercer's face drained of color. He glanced toward the glass wall, then back to Kane. "I don't know what you're talking about." Kane leaned forward, planting his hands on the desk. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Offshore accounts. Shipments that never existed on paper. And the names in that ledger." Mercer swallowed hard. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "On the contrary," Kane said, lowering his voice, "I know exactly who I'm messing with, which is why you're going to tell me everything before someone higher up decides you're a liability." Marla stepped closer, her voice a cold whisper. "Because once they think you've talked, Mercer, you're as good as dead." Mercer's gaze darted between them. Sweat glistened at his hairline. Finally, he exhaled in defeat. "Not here," he muttered. "Meet me tonight, 10 o'clock, east end of Riverside Park. I'll bring something." Back on the street, Marla shot Kane a look. "You trust him?" "No," Kane said, "but fear's a good motivator. If he thinks we can keep him alive, he'll play along, at least long enough to give us what we need." They didn't see the man across the street, half hidden in the doorway of a cafe, watching them leave. His coat collar was turned up, his eyes following their every move. When Kane and Marla disappeared in the crowd, he took out a phone and made a single call. "They've got Mercer." That night, Riverside Park was quiet except for the faint rush of water against the embankment. The lamps cast pale halos on the wet path. Kane and Marla arrived early, taking up positions in the shadows. A T-10 sharp, Mercer appeared, a messenger bag slung over one shoulder. His steps were quick, almost panicked. Kane stepped out to meet him. "Do you have it?" Mercer nodded. "Copies of internal transfers, shipment logs, everything. Enough to prove Hartwell's been laundering for Draeger for years." He unzipped the bag. A gunshot cracked the night. Mercer jerked, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. His knees buckled, and he collapsed on the path. The bag slid from his shoulder, down. Kane barked, pulling Marla with him behind a low stone wall. Another shot chipped the stone above their heads. Kane's mind went cold, calculating. The shooter had a clean line from the tree lean across the park. Professional, close enough to make the first shot count. Marla grabbed the bag, and they moved, keeping low, weaving through benches and shrubs. Another shot followed them, sparking off the path. Kane spotted an opening in the fence at the park's edge and pushed Marla through ahead of him. They landed in a narrow alley behind a row of shuttered shops. Only when they put 3 blocks between themselves and the park did Kane slow. Marlowe was breathing hard. He was dead before he hit the ground. Yeah, Kane said grimly. And Drager just told us exactly how far he'll go to keep this quiet. They ducked into a late-night laundromat to regroup. The hum of the dryers and the chemical tang of detergent made the space feel oddly sterile. Almost safe, but Kane knew better. In this city, safety was an illusion bought with either money or bullets, and he had neither to spare. Marla paced between the rows of washing machines, her boots squeaking faintly against the linoleum. We should have known it was a setup. The guy was practically sweating fear when we left his office. He wasn't the one who sold us out, Kane said, leaning against a folding table. His mind was already working the angles. They had someone shadowing us. Drager's people knew where Mercer would be. We just happened to be in the blast radius. Marla shot him a sharp look. You mean Mercer's death wasn't even about silencing him? It was about sending a message to us. They're saying, don't get close. Kane rubbed at the stubble along his jaw. But now that we have the bag, we're already close. Marla dropped into the chair across from him. What's inside? Kane unzipped the messenger bag and pulled out a thick sheaf of documents, all neatly bound with elastic bands. There were shipping manifests, wire transfer receipts, and, most damning of all, a ledger of shell company transactions stretching back 7 years. This isn't just laundering, Kane murmured, scanning the first few pages. This is infrastructure, a financial backbone keeping Drager's empire standing. Marla leaned over his shoulder, her voice low. If this gets into the right hands, Kane closed the bag abruptly. That's the problem. There are no right hands. Not in this city. Not in law enforcement. The minute we hand this over, it'll vanish into some evidence room, never to be seen again, if it doesn't get lost before then. Marla studied him. So what's the play? Kane met her eyes. We burned the tower from the inside. The plan started with a name on the documents. Lawrence Pike, Hartwell International's Vice President of Corporate Affairs. A man who moved comfortably between the legitimate business world and Drager's shadow economy. If Kane could get Pike talking, or catch him slipping, it would be enough to start unraveling the tower from the top point 2 nights later. Kane and Marla found themselves outside the echelon. A rooftop lounge that was all glass walls, leather seating, and overpriced martinis. It was where men like Pike came to pretend they weren't laundering millions for killers. Inside, jazz purred from hidden speakers, and the air was thick with perfume and expensive liquor. Pike was easy to spot, silver hair, tailor navy suit, drink in hand. He was holding court with 2 younger executives who looked at him like he was the high priest of profit. Marla moved to the bar to get a better angle, while Kane slid into a nearby booth, waiting for Pike to break away from his companions. When Pike finally stepped toward the bar for a refill, Kane intercepted him. Mr. Pike, Silas Kane. Pike's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. I've heard the name. I'm sure you have, Kane said evenly. We should talk. In private. Pike's smile was polite, but his voice carried a warning. If this is about business, Mr. Kane, my office hours are quite full. If it's about other matters, you should tread carefully. Kane stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Pike could hear. Iron Quarter accounts. Riverside Park. Colin Mercer. For just a fraction of a second, Pike's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his grip on his glass whitened. But then he gave a small, dismissive chuckle. I don't know what you think you're doing, Kane, but you should leave this city while you still can. Kane leaned in, his tone almost conversational. You know, Pike, I've walked away from a lot of fights in my life. This isn't one of them. They left the lounge without incident, but Kane could feel the shift in the air. Pike wouldn't go to the police, but he'd go straight to Drager. That was exactly what Kane wanted, because sometimes the only way to get a spider out of its web was to shake the threads that at T2 in the morning, Marla's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then at Kane. You're not going to like this. It was a photo message. Grainy, taken from a distance. Kane's safe house, the doors splintered, the interior ransacked. And across the bottom of the image, a message typed in bold block letters. You have 24 hours. The next day blurred into motion. Kane arranged a meeting with a tech contact who owed him favors. They scanned the documents from Mercer's bag into a secure, encrypted drive and set up a timed dead man switch. If Kane didn't check in every 12 hours, the files would be released to every media outlet. Law enforcement contact and underworld rival Draeger had that IT was insurance. Dangerous insurance, be why the time evening fell. Kane was ready for the final step, forcing Draeger to move in the open. Marla looked at him as they drove toward the waterfront, where one of Hartwell's import warehouses sat behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. You sure about this? No, Kane said. But if we're going to survive this, we can't keep running. We cut out the heart of this operation tonight. They parked 2 blocks away and went in on foot. The warehouse loomed like a steel coffin in the fog, its loading bays sealed, its yard silent. Kane picked the lock on the side door and they slipped inside. The smell hit first. Not the tang of electronics or machinery, but the damp, coppery scent of blood. Rows of crates stretched into the shadows, stacked 3 high. Kane cracked one open with a crowbar. Inside wasn't electronics. It was bricks of heroin wrapped tight in plastic, stacked like gold bars. Jesus, Marla whispered. This is it, Kane said. The whole supply chain. If we torch this place, the sound of footsteps cut him off. Heavy, deliberate, Draeger stepped out from between the crates. He was taller than Kane expected, with a cold, lean face and eyes that didn't blink enough. Behind him, for men fanned out, weapons drawn. You've been a busy man, Kane, Draeger said. His voice was almost casual, but it carried an edge like broken glass. And now you're going to give me back what's mine. Kane's mind raced. There was no way out that didn't involve blood. You can kill me, Kane said, but that file goes public the second my heart stops beating. And you'll have every cop, journalist, and rival breathing down your neck before the week's over. Draeger smiled faintly. Then I suppose I better make sure you keep breathing. For now. Draeger's smile was thin and deliberate. The kind of expression a predator gives when it's already decided how it's going to dismantle you. He stepped closer, boots crunching faintly over scattered debris on the warehouse floor. You've made quite the mess for me, Kane. Mercer dead, my ledger missing, Pike spooked. Tell me, what's your endgame? Kane kept his breathing steady. The same as yours, Draeger. Survival. Only difference is I'm not willing to bury the city under heroin to get it. A quiet laugh escaped Draeger. You're not a moral man, Kane. You've just chosen a different set of devils to kneel to. Marla shifted beside him, her hand inching toward the compact pistol hidden beneath her coat. Kane noticed the move without turning his head. Draeger noticed too, but didn't react, which meant he wasn't underestimating them. He was confident enough to let them think they had a shot. The goons fanned out wider, forming a loose half circle. 2 blocked the exit. 1 lingered near the stacks of crates. Another hovered behind Draeger, close enough to be his shadow. You can hand me the files now, Draeger said, and maybe you walk out of here tonight. Or we make this unpleasant. Kane smiled faintly, though his pulse thudded hard in his ears. You got the wrong read on me. I don't walk out here on maybe. For a fraction of a second, Draeger's eyes narrowed, the first crack in his composure. Kane seized it. He lunged sideways, shoving Marla toward a crate for cover, and drew his own pistol in one fluid motion. The first shot tore through the silence, a deafening crack that sent the men scattering. Kane hit the floor behind a forklift, splinters flying as bullets slammed into metal. Marla returned fire from the other side of the aisle, her muzzle flashes lighting the fog that hung low in the cavernous space. Draeger didn't shoot. He stepped back into the shadows, letting his men do the work, his voice cutting through the chaos. Bring them down, alive if you can. Kane fired twice, dropping one of the goons with a clean shot to the shoulder. Another rushed him, ducking behind crates. Kane caught the movement out of the corner of his eye, pivoted, and slammed the man against the forklift's frame, disarming him with a sharp twist. The gun clattered to the floor. Kane kicked it under the machine that Marla's sidearm clicked empty. She swore, ducked behind cover, and yanked a fresh mag from her pocket. A shot ripped through the crate above her, showering her in splinters. Kane saw the shooter lining up another round and put him down before he could pull the trigger. Then, a sound Kane had been waiting for, the faint hiss of leaking fuel. One of the stray rounds had pierced a barrel near the wall, spilling gasoline across the concrete. The acrid smell filled the air. "Marla!" Kane shouted over the gunfire. "Light it up." She didn't hesitate, pulling a flare from her coat, an old habit of hers for situations exactly like this. She struck it against the floor. The red glow burst to life, casting the warehouse in an eerie, hellish light. She tossed it across the slick of gasoline. The ignition was instant. A roaring wall of flame raced along the fuel trail, licking at the stacked crates. Heat slammed into them like a physical force. Somewhere above, an alarm wailed to life that Drager's men faltered, the fire breaking their line. Kane grabbed Marla's arm and yanked her toward the side door. They sprinted through the smoke, lungs burning. One of the goons gave chase, but Kane didn't slow. He slammed the door shut behind them and shot the lock, buying precious seconds. Outside, the night air was a shock against their sweat and soot. Sirens were already rising in the distance. Police, fire, maybe both. Kane didn't care. The job wasn't about escaping unnoticed anymore. It was about surviving the night. They rounded the corner just as an explosion ripped through the warehouse. The blast wave shoved them forward, rattling windows in the nearby buildings. Black smoke billowed into the sky, lit from beneath by the inferno they'd left behind. Marla staggered to a stop, coughing hard. That's gonna cripple him, Kane. All that product. Kane shook his head. Not enough. Drager's the kind of man who keeps backups. The drugs, the cash, they're symptoms. The disease is his network. He glanced at the burning warehouse one last time. The flames reflected in his dark eyes. And now he knows I'm coming for it. They didn't go back to the safe house. Instead, they vanished into the city's underbelly, a web of train tunnels, shuttered factories, and forgotten speakeasies where the police didn't patrol and Drager's reach was thinner. Kane knew a place run by a woman named Vera, a retired thief who owed him more than one favor. Vera's hideout was in an abandoned textile mill. She greeted them with a shotgun in hand, her wiry frame tense until she recognized Kane. "Christ, Silas," she said, lowering the weapon. "You look like hell." "Hell looks better dressed," Kane replied. "We need a place to disappear for a couple of days. Somewhere no one will think to look." Vera studied him for a long beat, then nodded toward a steel door in the back. "Room's dusty, but it'll do." Later, when the adrenaline had drained and the silence of the hideout settled in, Kane sat on the edge of the narrow cot, staring at the encrypted drive in his hands. The fire had hurt Drager, but hurting him wasn't the same as beating him that he could feel the clock ticking. Drager wouldn't lick his wounds for long. When the counterpunch came, it would be fast and brutal. Marla broke the silence from across the room. "You know he's going to come harder now." Kane looked up at her. "Good. The closer he gets, the more mistakes he'll make." In the faint light from the single dust-streaked window, Kane's expression was unreadable, but his voice carried the weight of a man already thinking 3 moves ahead. Because in the game they were playing, there was no winning on defense. It was time to take the fight to Drager. The rain began in the dead hours before dawn, the kind that came without wind or warning. A steady curtain of water that blurred the skyline into a smear of neon and concrete. From the broken window of Vera's hideout, Kane watched it fall, each droplet glinting briefly in the dim streetlights before disappearing into the black slick of the asphalt. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. His mind kept circling the same points. Drager's retreat from the warehouse fire, the encrypted drive that still hadn't been cracked, and the unanswered question gnawing at the edges of everything. Why the bloodletter had surfaced now. After all these years, behind him, the low rasp of Marla's breathing told him she was asleep, or close enough to it. She'd taken first watch after they'd arrived, and her exhaustion was a visible weight on her shoulders. Kane turned from the window, crossing to the makeshift work table Vera had provided. A battered lamp, a pair of pliers, 2 knives, and an ashtray littered with the remnants of cheap cigars. That was all it held besides the drive. He picked it up again, running his thumb along its edge. Smooth, cold, silent. Every instinct told him this was the linchpin, that somewhere inside its encrypted walls was the truth Drager would kill to keep buried. The question was, how deep was he willing to dig? And what else might crawl out when he did? Vera appeared in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the glow of the hallway. Coffee's on. Figured you'd be up. Kane gave a thin smile. Figured right. She stepped inside, eyeing the drive. You look like a man trying to stare a hole through a problem instead of solving it. Been trying to solve it for hours, Kane said, setting it down. Encryption's too heavy for my gear. Need a specialist. Vera leaned against the table. I might know one. Guy named Lenny Patch, Pirelli. Used to do bang jobs in the 80s, but these days he's more interested in data than safes. Still lives in the city. Still owes me for a certain incident in '03. Kane's eyebrow rose slightly. The incident where you swapped the real diamonds for glass. Vidas Mirkt. That's the one. By the time Marla woke, the rain had thickened into a constant drumming on the roof. They moved fast. Vera's warning that Patch didn't keep the same address for more than a week had lit a fuse on their timetable. Patch's current hideout turned out to be a cluttered electronics repair shop hidden in the basement of a derelict pawn store. The front windows were covered in cardboard, the sign long since faded to a ghost of its former self. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of solder and burnt plastic. Towers of disassembled radios and gutted laptops formed narrow corridors between the workbenches. Patch himself was a wiry man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and hands that trembled only when idle. His eyes lit with wary recognition when he saw Vera. Thought you were dead, he said flatly. Only inside, she replied. He glanced at Kane and Marla, then at the drive. That's trouble. Everything worth opening is trouble, Kane said. Patch worked in silence, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with a precision that belied his age. The only sounds were the rain against the boarded windows and the steady hum of ancient computers. Finally, after nearly an hour, Patch leaned back. You've got military-grade encryption here. Not government. Private, which is worse. Means whoever owns it has more money than God and more lawyers than bullets. And I'm willing to bet they've got plenty of both. Kane felt something in his gut tighten. Can you break it? Patch hesitated. I can try. But if I do, the people who put this together might feel it. You ever been on the wrong end of a digital tripwire? Kane said nothing. He didn't need to. IT took another 2 hours before the drive finally gave way. A cascade of data filling Patch's screens. Lines of coded text, folders with strings of numbers, and, most importantly, dozens of scanned documents stamped with various seals. Patch whistled low. You've got ledgers, contracts, wire transfer receipts, offshore accounts, names, a lot of them. This is not just Drager's playpen. This is half the damn city's underworld in one place. Kane's eyes narrowed as he scanned the files. Politicians, judges, business tycoons, all tied together through a network of shell companies and blood money. And then, buried in one folder, he saw it. A scan of the bloodletter. Not the one found at Mercer's murder scene, an older one. The handwriting was identical. The crimson blot identical. Only the name at the bottom was different. IT wasn't Drager's. It was someone Kane had thought dead for 20 years. That was the moment the betrayal hit. Not the betrayal itself, but the realization of what it meant. That I meant Drager wasn't the architect of this conspiracy. He was just one player in a much bigger game, and the real mastermind had been close enough, once, to put a bullet in Kane's head without warning. Marla leaned over his shoulder. You know that name. Kane didn't answer. Couldn't. The room felt too small, the air too thin. Vera's voice broke the silence. You're gonna have to tell us who it is, Kane. But he wasn't ready. Not yet. Not until he was sure. Kane set the drive down as if it were a loaded weapon, the kind with no safety and a hair trigger. The name still burned in his mind, letters etched deep like old scars, but he pushed away from the desk and walked toward the far side of Patch's workshop, weaving between stacks of cracked monitors and dismantled printers. The air smelled faintly of ozone and damp cardboard, and with each step, he felt Marla's gaze boring into his back. Silas, she said finally, voice low, don't go silent on me now. He stopped near a window half covered in dust-caked blinds. The rain outside had picked up again, hammering against the warped glass. His reflection was just a blur, fragmented by streaks of water. Fitting, he thought, for a man who'd been living in fragments for years. When he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. Elias Cross. Vera frowned. Doesn't ring a bell. Patch's eyebrows shot up. Cross. As in a cross syndicate? That cross is dead. Kane turned, his face pale under the flickering light. Yeah, he was supposed to be. I put him in the ground myself. The silence after that felt like a physical thing, heavy and waiting point 20 years ago. Elias Cross had been more than just an enemy. He'd been Kane's partner, in the field, in the shadows, in the dangerous business of dismantling organized crime from the inside. They'd been deep undercover in a network that made Drager's operation look like a street gang. Cross had been ambitious, cunning, charismatic, and when the moment came, utterly merciless. The mission had gone bad. A double cross, not just in name, had left Kane bleeding in an alley while Cross vanished with enough stolen intel to bring down the city's power structure or sell it to the highest bidder. Kane had tracked him to a derelict shipyard, a storm raging overhead. The fight had been brutal, primal. In the end, Kane had emptied his sidearm in a cross and watched him fall into the black water below. The body was never recovered. Marla's voice cut through his thoughts. If he's alive, he's been hiding all this time? Waiting. Building, Kane said. Cross never played small. If he's behind the blood letters, then Drager's just a piece of the board. Patch leaned back in his chair, and you just cracked open the one piece of evidence that ties all of them together. Which means they'll come for you now. Not Drager. Not just his men. Everyone. Vera crossed her arms. Sounds like suicide to go after him. Kane gave a humorless smile. Suicide would be easier. This is going to take patience. Patch slid a stack of printed files toward Kane. You'll want these. I'm wiping the rest. If they know this drive was breached, they'll scorch everything, and then you'll never get another lead. Marla picked up the papers, scanning the top page. Her eyes widened. These are payment logs. Cross has been bankrolling Drager for years. And, wait, there are payouts to someone in the mayor's office. Kane's jaw tightened. That's how he stays invisible. By the law before it buys you. The plan began to form in Kane's mind. Not a clear map yet, but the shape of something inevitable. They couldn't just take Cross down. They had to dismantle his protection, bleed his network until he was exposed and vulnerable. And the first step would be to hit somewhere he thought untouchable. That'd be by the time they left Patches. The rain had slowed to a mist. Kane led the way through the back alley, papers sealed in a waterproof folder beneath his coat. Marla followed, silent but watchful. Halfway to Vera's car, Kane stopped dead, a black sedan idled at the far end of the alley, its headlights off. The faint orange glow of a cigarette flared in the driver's seat, then vanished. Kane's hand went to the grip of his pistol. "We've got company." The car door opened. Two figures stepped out, both tall, both wearing dark coats that hung almost to their knees. No words, no weapons drawn, but the way they moved was wrong. Too smooth, too deliberate. "Keep walking," Kane murmured. They didn't make it 3 steps before the first man lunged. Kane shoved Marla aside, catching the man's wrist as a blade flashed in the dim light. The steel was short, curved, meant for close work. Kane twisted hard, feeling the joint strain under his grip, and drove his knee into the attacker's ribs. Marla drew her weapon and fired at the second man, the shot echoing down the alley. He ducked behind the sedan, returning fire with a suppressed pistol that made the air crack like tearing fabric. Kane slammed the first man against the wall, the knife clattering to the wet pavement. In one fluid motion, he drove his elbow into the man's jaw, sending him collapsing to the ground, that Marla's second shot punched through the sedan's windshield. The second attacker stumbled, clutching his shoulder, but didn't go down. He slid into the driver's seat, engine roaring, and the car peeled out, tires screeching on the slick pavement. Kane stood in the rain, chest heaving. The first man was still alive. Groaning faintly, Pete crouched beside him. "Who sent you?" The man spat blood, a faint grin on his split lip. "You already know." Kane didn't press further. Some answers you didn't need confirmed to believe. Back at Vera's, they patched up the shallow cut on Kane's arm. The papers were spread across the table, rainwater dripping onto the floor from their coats. "This changes the order of things," Kane said finally. "Drager's not priority one anymore. Crosses, and if we go after him, we're going to burn every bridge we've got." Marla looked at him steadily. "Then we find new ones." The flicker of something passed through Kane's eyes. Not hope, not exactly, but the faint recognition that they were past the point of no return. They were in Cross's game now, and the only way to win was to play it better than he did. Vera had pulled the blinds tight and turned the lock on the door twice. The room felt like it had shrunk around them, shadows pooling in the corners, the sound of rain now just a faint hiss against the walls. Kane stood at the table, palms pressed flat against the scattered papers. Names, dates, and figures stared back at him. A web of corruption so thick it was hard to see where it began or ended. But his eyes kept finding the same point in the mess, like gravity pulling him toward it. An account number tied to a shipping company called Orion Freight and Logistics. "What's so special about them?" Marla asked, noticing his fixation. Kane traced the name with his finger. "Orion's been moving containers through Dock 7 for the last 3 years. Officially, they're shipping machine parts. Unofficially, he tapped one of the printouts. Cross has wired them more money than some country's GDP. This is a funnel, drugs, weapons, maybe people. Whatever's inside those containers is financing everything else in this network. Vera lindin, lighting a cigarette. Dock 7's mob territory. Drager's men won't go near it unless they're invited. Which means if Orion's running goods through there, they're untouchable." "Exactly," Kane said, "which makes it the perfect place to hit him. He won't expect it, not yet." Patch, still at his terminal in the corner, snorted. "You make it sound like a smash and grab. That place will be crawling with hired guns who shoot first and check credentials never. You go in without a plan, you're not walking out." "I have a plan," Kane said. "We go in quiet. No gunfire unless there's no choice. Get into the main office, pull their manifest records, find what's coming in next week, and get out before anyone knows we were there." Marla's eyes narrowed. "And you think they're just going to hand us those manifests?" "They won't have to," Kane said. "We'll take them." They spent the next 2 hours building the blueprint. Vera drew a rough layout of Dock 7 from memory, marking the patrol routes and blind spots she remembered from a job she'd pulled there years back. Patch found a way into Orion's internal servers that would sync with a physical connection, but only if someone could plug into their secure terminal on site. That someone would be Kane. Marla would cover him from the observation deck, overlooking the main floor. Vera would run interference on the docks, posing as a late-shift customs inspector with a forged badge patch whipped up on the spot. The clock ticked past midnight by the time the plan was set. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the street lamps. "This isn't going to be clean," Vera warned. "Even if you get in and out without a shot fired, Cross will know someone's been inside his house." Kane nodded. "Good. Let him know. I want him to start looking over his shoulder." Dock 7 sat at the far edge of the industrial waterfront, where the city's neon bled into black water. The warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, their corrugated walls streaked with rust and salt. The air smelled of diesel and the faint metallic tang of the ocean. They approached in silence, splitting up at the chain-link fence that enclosed the perimeter. Vera's forged badge got her through the main gate without a glance from the board guard. Marla scaled the side of a cargo stack, vanishing into the shadows above. Kane moved low and fast, slipping between rows of containers toward the office building. Inside, the office was dimly lit, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Desks cluttered with paperwork and coffee cups lined the walls. A single security guard sat at the far end, absorbed in whatever was on his phone. Kane moved like a shadow, closing the distance silently. The man never saw him coming. One quick chokehold, a gentle lowering to the floor, and Kane was past him, but he found the terminal in a side office, sleek, black, and locked behind a fingerprint scanner. Patch's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Scanner's a joke. Pull the panel and you'll see a manual override. Just remember, once you plug me in, I've got maybe 2 minutes before the system logs the breach." Kane pried the panel loose, revealing the port. He slid the small data spike into place. "Connected," Patch murmured. "Stand by." 2 minutes stretched into an eternity. Kane could hear his own breathing, the creak of the building settling, the faint thud of boots on concrete outside. Marla's voice came low in his ear. "You've got 2 guards heading for the office. They don't look casual." "Patch," Kane said. "How long?" 30 seconds. Footsteps drew closer. Kane slid into the shadows beside the door, pistol drawn but held low. The first guard stepped inside, and Kane's hand shot out, pulling him into the room and striking him across the temple with the pistol's grip. The second guard had just enough time to register what was happening before Kane swept his legs out from under him. Both men were out cold. Patch's voice came back, tense but triumphant. "Got it. Pull me out." Kane yanked the spike free, tucking it into his coat. They regrouped in an abandoned lot 2 blocks from the docks. Vera was already there, flicking her cigarette into the gutter as Kane and Marla approached. Patch's voice came through on speaker this time. "Manifest shows a shipment arriving in 4 days. Container number AX 4419. Official paperwork says industrial compressors. My guess? Whatever's inside isn't meant for the public." Kane felt the edges of the trap forming in his mind. Cross is moving something big, something he needs protected. "And we just got the key to the lockbox," Marla added. Vera gave Kane a long look. "You know he's going to know it was you tonight. That's the point, isn't it?" Kane's expression was unreadable. "I want him to know I'm coming. I want him to feel it every second between now and the moment we meet." The rain began again, light but steady. It hissed on the pavement, carrying away the last traces of the dock's salt in the distance. The city lights flickered, as if bracing for the storm Kane was about to bring. The city had gone quiet by the time Kane reached the waterfront, but the docks never truly slept. Dock 7 stretched before him like some dark, coiled predator, rusted cranes looming against a jaundiced night sky, the hiss of shifting tide slapping oily water against barnacled pylons. Sodium floodlights cast cones of sickly yellow across the asphalt, each pool of light making the shadows beyond seem even blacker. He could feel the weight of the place pressing in. Not just the tons of steel stacked in neat rows, but the history of deals brokered in whispers and sealed in blood. This was Cross's turf, and stepping here without permission was like walking into a cathedral with a lit match. From the back seat of Vera's sedan, Kane scanned the dock entrance through a veil of cigarette smoke. The gate was manned by a dozen hard-looking men in identical dark jackets, their posture too rigid for casual laborers. He clocked the bulges under their coats, not hip holsters, shoulder rigs, the kind professionals favored when they wanted to look unarmed at a glance. "You weren't kidding," Vera said from the driver's seat, her voice low. "That's a lot of firepower for moving industrial compressors." Patch's voice crackled in Kane's earpiece from his perch somewhere high and unseen. "X 4419 cleared customs 20 minutes ago. Ship's docking now. You've got maybe 15 before it's loaded on a truck and gone. Kane leaned forward between the seats. 15's enough. If we do it quiet. Vera killed the headlights 2 blocks out, letting the car roll into the shadow of a warehouse with peeling paint and boarded windows. The air here was thicker, heavy with the metallic tang of salt and the acrid bite of diesel fumes. Farther out, a cargo ship's low horn vibrated through the pavement like a slow, ominous drumbeat. Kane opened the rear door and stepped into the damp night, the vinyl seat clinging to the back of his coat. "We go on foot from here," he said, pulling the dark knit cap down over his ears. Marla was already checking her weapon, eyes on the route ahead. 2 patrols west, moving slow. We cut across the maintenance lane and head up the ladder to the catwalk. Should give us a good line over AX 4419 without drawing eyes. Kane nodded, but didn't move right away. His gaze swept over the geometry of the dock, the pools of light under each lamppost, the blind spots between container stacks, the rhythm of the moving forklifts. He'd been in enough places like this to know that complacency killed faster than bullets. "You keep your head low," he murmured to Vera, "and be ready for the distraction on my signal." "Not before." Vera gave him a sharp grin. "Don't worry, Kane. I can make noise better than anyone." They slipped into the tangle of containers, the steel walls towering above them like cliffs, their chipped paint and graffiti a silent testament to decades of unseen traffic. Each footstep was muffled by the damp grit underfoot, but every clang of metal from a distant crane made Kane's nerves twitch. From somewhere in the distance came the rhythmic thump of a forklift reversing. 2 beeps, a pause, 2 beeps again. Kane timed their movements with those sounds, using them to mask their steps when crossing exposed spaces. Halfway through the maze, Marla froze and threw up a hand. Ahead, 2 men in dark jackets leaned against a stack of containers, the dull cherry of cigarette tip glowing in the dark. They were speaking low, too low to catch words, but the lazy posture was deceptive. Both had their jackets unzipped enough for easy draws. Kane weighed the options. Go back meant losing time. Taking them out quietly meant leaving bodies that someone would notice in minutes. Instead, he crouched low and led Marla around the far side, slipping through a narrow gap between rust-streaked walls where the smell of seawater was sharper. One guard laughed at something the other said. The sound followed them until the next bend swallowed it whole. The maintenance ladder was older than Kane had expected, its paint flaking away to reveal orange-brown corrosion. He tested the first rung. It held. The climb was slow. Every creak felt like a flare going up in the night. But soon they were on the catwalk, the dock unfolding beneath them like a map of moving shadows. From this height, Kane could see AX 4419 being eased onto the pier from the ship's crane, the cables groaning under its weight. A half circle of armed guards surrounded the drop zone, scanning the area with the dead-eyed patience of men used to waiting for trouble. "Too many," Marlowe whispered. Kane scanned the rest of the dock and saw headlights approaching from the east. A white SUV rolled to a stop outside the gate. 3 men got out, plain clothes. One of them carried himself with an unmistakable predatory swagger. Even at a distance, Kane recognized him, Detective Harold Sloan. The Wolf. Kane's jaw tightened. Sloan's reputation wasn't built on cases closed, but on debts collected. He wore the badge like a shield when it suited him, and like a weapon when it didn't. Seeing him here meant this wasn't just a smuggling job. It was something bigger. Sloan spoke briefly to the lead guard, flashed something, a badge, probably, and was waved through without hesitation. Kane watched him walk straight to AX 4419 as if he owned the place. His 2 shadows fanning out behind him. Patch's voice buzzed in Kane's ear. "You want the good news or the bad news first?" "Bad," Kane said. "That container's not going anywhere for at least 15 minutes. Cross's boys are doing something inside. And the good, I just tapped into the dock security feed. There's no record of Sloan's arrival. Someone's already wiped it." Kane swore under his breath. That meant Sloan wasn't here on department business. He was here for himself. Kane keyed his mic. "Vera, get ready. When I say go, make it loud." "What's your play?" she asked. "We let Sloan open it for us. Then we take a look before he can move it. Stealing from the Wolf while he's stealing from Cross. Vera Chakol. Bold." It's not bold. It's necessary. Down below, Sloane's men pried open the container with a crowbar. A hiss of chilled air drifted out. Sloane stepped inside. That was the moment. Now, Kane said, Vera's flare arced through the night and landed in a stack of oil drums. The sudden burst of red light was followed by the hiss of igniting fumes and a sharp crack that echoed across the dock. Shouts went up, guards swarming toward the blaze. The container's interior smelled faintly metallic, like cold steel and something chemical, almost sweet, the kind of odor Kane's instincts flagged as dangerous before his mind could identify it. Frost clung to the seams of the stacked black cases, each one strapped down with heavy nylon webbing. A thin vapor curled along the floor, swirling around Kane's boots. Sloane was crouched at the far end, the dull glint of a crowbar in his gloved hands. His suit jacket was open, a shoulder holster sitting snug against his ribs. The way his fingers moved, calm, unhurried, told Kane that Sloane didn't believe he was in danger here. That was almost always when men made mistakes. When the crowbar popped the latch, a faint hiss escaped, and Sloane peeled the lid back like a magician revealing a trick. Inside lay a row of rifles, each matte black with suppressors already fitted, the foam cut perfectly to cradle them. But Sloane didn't linger on the guns. His hand slid under the foam and pressed something on the base. A section of the false bottom rose silently, revealing the dull silver of metal cylinders packed in ice. The hazard symbol, black and unmistakable, stared up like an unblinking eye. Fancy hardware, Sloane said without looking at Kane. Worth more than the mayor's house. And that's just the top shelf. What's in the cans? Kane asked, voice even. Sloane chuckled, finally glancing at him. Always so curious. That's your problem, Kane. You don't know when to stop digging. Sometimes you find oil. Sometimes you find a grave. You think I scare that easily? No, Sloane said, setting the crowbar aside. I think you want to be scared, but you forgot how. That's why you keep sticking your nose into holes full of snakes. The man's eyes, pale and sharp as a hawk's, studied Kane like he was reading the margins of a book no one else could see. You remember the Spring Street fire? Kane's stomach tightened. I remember the file. That was me, Sloane said simply. Not in the papers, of course, but I kept my hands clean. Walked right out while you were still playing by the rules. And here you are, still trying to pretend the rules matter. Sloane took a slow step closer, his boots silent on the steel floor. The vapor shifted around him like smoke following a flame. I could use a man like you. You've seen the cracks in the city. You know the people who run things aren't the ones with the titles. And you think that makes you the king? It makes me the wolf. And in a city like this, you're either the wolf or you're meat. Kane kept his gaze locked on Sloane's. I've been hunted before. Sloane smirked, but not by me for a long moment. Only the distant clang of dock machinery filled the space between them. Somewhere outside, a guard shouted something about the fire. The sound of running feet echoed faintly. Kane leaned just enough to glance at the cylinders again. Whatever's in there, you think you can control it. But men like Cross, they don't share. And when he's done with you, Sloane's grin didn't falter. You think I'm working for Cross? That's cute. The conversation cut off as heavy footsteps thudded past the open container door. Flashlight beams swept briefly across the dock, slicing through the mist. Voices barked orders in rapid, urgent bursts as Sloane's two men appeared at the door. We've got company, one said. Finish loading, Sloane told them. He turned back to Kane. You should go before you get mistaken for the wrong side. Kane didn't move. You're the wrong side. Sloane's smirk widened into something colder. That's the thing about sides. They change whether you do or not. Marla had been snapping photos quietly the whole time, her camera's faint click lost under the hum of refrigeration units. Now, she slid the lens cap back on and gave Kane a tight nod. Time was up. They stepped out the opposite end of the container, moving low between the stacks. The fire Vera had set still threw up plumes of oily smoke, painting the dock in a shifting orange haze. Guards were running in every direction, some toward the flames, some toward the ship, radios squawking in chaotic bursts that a voice shouted from behind. "Hey, you!" Kingdom looked back. He grabbed Marla's arm and ducked behind a forklift, the metal still warm from recent use. The shouts grew louder. They broke into a sprint across an open strip, boots hammering the pavement. The air tasted like burning oil, bitter in the throat. Kane's eyes watered from the smoke, but he could still make out Vera's sedan idling under the shadow of the warehouse. Something cracked past his ear, a gunshot, loud and close. Marla Dove sliding behind a stack of crates. Kane followed, breathing hard, ears ringing. More shouts. More gunfire. A bullet pinged off the steel beside his head. They waited until a forklift roared past, blocking the line of sight, then used it as moving cover. The driver didn't even glance at them, too focused on hauling another container away from the blaze. When they reached the car, Vera had the passenger door open. "You took your damn time," she said. Kane slid in, pulling Marla after him. "Go!" As they sped away, Kane twisted in his seat for one last look. In the distance, he could just make out Sloane, standing calm in the chaos, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He raised 2 fingers in a mock salute. Kane faced forward again, jaw tight. The Wolf wasn't just a player in this game. He was already 3 moves ahead, and Kane had just walked into his board. The night after Dock 7 was one of those stretches of time Kane knew he wouldn't remember in a linear way. It would be fragments later, the squeal of wet tires on blacktop, Vera's steady hands on the wheel, the city rolling past in a slow dissolve of sodium light and shadow. The rain had stopped, but the streets still sweated with it, every puddle a smear of neon, every gutter carrying the last of the storm toward the drains. Somewhere behind them, the dock's cold steel and reek of salt were already fading into the city's bloodstream. But Kane could feel it in his muscles. They hadn't just poked at something tonight. They'd woken it. Vera glanced sideways at him as they slid past a dead intersection. "You're quiet." "Listening," Kane said, his eyes on the side mirror. "For what?" "Footsteps you can't hear yet." The sedan's wipers dragged in one last sweep and clicked off. The industrial fringe of the city was wrapped in that liminal quiet that came after rain. Half relief, half dread. Warehouses loomed out of the dark, their corrugated faces streaked with rust and history. Chain-link fences sagged like tired old men, their spines bent under the weight of years. The air smelled faintly of oil, damp concrete, and something metallic that always hung near the waterfront that Patch's so-called safe house wasn't much to look at. A 3-story brick relic squatting above a pawn shop whose window display hadn't changed in a decade. Vera killed the lights a block away, coasting into the narrow alley that ran behind it. The tires crunched over scattered gravel and shards of glass. Kane caught movement in the upper window, a quick tilt of blinds and the faint glimmer of light behind them. They climbed the warped wooden stairs, their boots drumming on the boards. The air in the stairwell was a cocktail of mildew and old cigarette smoke. The 3rd-floor door opened before they knocked. Inside, the place smelled faintly of fried food from the pawn shop owner's kitchen downstairs. Patch was hunched over a laptop at the chipped dining table, a half-dozen tabs of scrolling code reflecting in his eyes. Marla was at the counter, unloading her camera with the kind of care a bomb squad gives live ordnance. "I've got the rifles, the shipping containers, the hazard stencils," she said without looking up. "Even got one of the dock hands shaking hands with a guy I'm pretty sure is on Interpol's do not invite to dinner list." "Great," Patch said dryly. "Now all you have to do is not get killed before you can show them to anyone." Kane ignored the sarcasm. He moved straight to the window, sweeping the curtain aside with 2 fingers. Across the street, parked in the perfect line of sight to the safe house door, was a black sedan. No lights, just a faint blue glow of a dashboard screen inside. He'd been in enough stakeouts to recognize the posture. Someone sitting very still, conserving energy, waiting for time to do their work. "We've had a shadow," Kane said quietly. The others gathered. Vera took the curtain from him and peered out. "Not cops. Wrong posture. Too patient." Marla's voice was tight. "Sloane's. Or Cross's," Kane said. "Or both. Doesn't matter whose hand's on the leash. Same kennel." They set up a rotation for watch. Kane took the first, leaning against the wall near the window, his pistol on the table beside a lukewarm cup of coffee. The black sedan didn't so much as twitch. Once, near 3 in the morning, the passenger door cracked open and a man stepped out. Kane caught the flare of a lighter, the slow exhale of smoke. The man smoked like someone who had all night, no hurry in the world, and then slipped back into the car. The hours stretched and folded on themselves. A police scanner muttered in the background, its static like an old man's wheeze. Somewhere in the building, a pipe dripped steadily. Patch worked quietly, his fingers clattering on the keys. Vera dozed in a chair, her head tipped back, but Kane knew she wasn't truly asleep. Dawn came reluctantly, bleeding into the sky like someone opening their eyes after a long night of bad dreams. The black sedan was still there. That was what told Kane they weren't just being watched. They were being measured. Patch's laptop pinged at 6:07. He leaned forward, tapping the trackpad. "Traffic cam on West 13th. You're going to want to see this." The feed was grainy, washed out by the morning light, but the figure was clear enough. Arturo Mendez. Kane's eyes narrowed. "I thought he was dead." "Yeah," Patch said. "So did half the city." Mendez had been Cross's mid-level enforcer. Not big enough to be feared on his own, but connected enough to make trouble. Then he'd vanished months ago, rumors saying he'd skimmed from the wrong shipment and ended up in a landfill. But there he was now, hunched in a booth at a greasy spoon diner, a mug in his hands. "Too public," Vera said. "If he wanted to meet, there are 100 safer places." "Maybe he wants to be found," Kane said. "Maybe by us." Marla crossed her arms. "And maybe he's bait." Kane stood, sliding his pistol into the shoulder holster. "Bait still tells you something about the fisherman." The diner was 6 blocks away, tucked between a boarded-up pharmacy and a tire shop with more weeds than customers. The bell over the door chimed weakly as Kane stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and bacon that had died twice, once on the grill and once under the heat lamps. A jukebox in the corner was frozen mid-song. Mendez was in the last booth by the window, his shoulders hunched, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. His eyes flicked up as Kane approached. Recognition and relief flashed there, but under it was the same thing Kane saw in every man who'd run too long from the wrong people: inevitability. "You've been looking for me," Mendez rasped. "You've been hiding," Kane replied, sliding into the booth. "They'll kill me for talking to you." "They'll kill you for not being useful," Kane said. "Might as well get something out of it." Mendez swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he set the mug down. The shipment at Dock 7? Cross wasn't the one calling the shots. He was moving it for someone bigger, someone who owns people like him. "Who?" Mendez leaned in, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fear. "You ever hear the wolf?" Kane's jaw tightened. He'd heard the name in whispers that faded like smoke. No confirmed face, no paper trail, just a rumor that behind the city's fractured gangs and syndicates was a single predator with teeth in every deal. Mendez glanced toward the window, then stiffened. Kane didn't need to look to know what had set him off: the change in light, the shift in the air when a door opens. The bell over the diner door jangled. Boots on tile, steady, deliberate point, 2 men moved down the aisle toward them, coats hanging loose, eyes locked. The taller one smiled, the kind of smile that said he'd already decided how this conversation would end. "Mr. Kane," he said, "our employer would like a word." Kane kept his hands on the table, his voice even. "Tell him I'll call him when I'm in the mood." The man's smile didn't falter, but his right hand twitched, a signal to his partner. Kane moved first. The table slammed forward, coffee exploding in a brown arc. He was up and moving before the cup hit the floor, pistol clearing leather. The first shot took the tall man in the chest, spinning him sideways. The second man ducked low, drawing fast, but Kane's third round caught him high in the shoulder, knocking him into the counter. Mendez was already moving, bolting for the kitchen. Kane followed, shoving through the swinging panel into a space that reeked of fryer oil and old grease. Stainless steel counters loomed like dull mirrors. They burst through the back door into the alley, the air cool and damp. The bricks glistened with moisture, graffiti blooming in the half-light. Kane heard engines turning over somewhere beyond the alley mouth. Mendez ran left, shoes splashing through puddles. Kane was right behind him. They'd almost reached the street when a black SUV slid into place, blocking the exit. Doors cracked open in unison. Kane yanked Mendez sideways, shoving him through a warped side door into a dusty, abandoned storefront. The air inside was thick with the smell of rot and forgotten paper. Boards nailed over the windows let in thin blades of light. "They're not going to stop," Kane said as pistol steadied and Mendez's breathing was ragged. "Then you better make them." The front door crashed inward. The first man threw catching Kane's fist square in the jaw. He went down hard. Kane pivoted, firing toward the shadow behind him. The shots were thunder in the confined space, plaster dust raining from the ceiling. Figures scattered outside, but one got through a lean man with a knife. Kane sidestepped, catching his wrist and slamming him into the counter. The blade clattered to the floor. Kane put him down with a short, brutal punch. Mendez bolted for the back again, but the shot came from the street. A sharp, clean crack that punched him in the chest. He staggered back into the wall, eyes wide. Kane dropped beside him, pressing a hand to the wound. "Stay with me." Mendez's lips moved. The words were faint. The wolf behind the badge. His eyes clouded before Kane could ask more. Outside, the engines roared again, fading into the city. Kane stood, blood slick on his hands. He looked toward the broken doorway, the boards hanging loose like broken teeth. Somewhere out there, the wolf was watching, and now Kane knew he had friends in places Kane had once trusted. The rain was falling again before Kane even made it back to the safe house. Not the kind of rain that clears the air. No, this was the low, clinging kind. Mist that wrapped itself around the city and refused to let go. It sat heavy in the streets, turning the glow of every street lamp into smeared halos. Neon signs bled into the fog until you couldn't tell if the light was real or just a trick of tired eyes. Kane didn't bother wiping the water from his face. Mendez's blood was still tacky on his fingers, and he wasn't ready to let the rain take that away. Not yet. Blood was a reminder, not just of death, but of the truth that had been paid for in it. Vera opened the door before his knuckles touched wood. Her eyes scanned his face like she was looking for the shape of the answer before hearing it. "He's gone," Kane said simply. Her jaw tightened. She stepped aside without a word. Inside, the safe house felt smaller than usual. The low hum of Patch's monitors filled the room. 2 screens glowed in front of him. One streaming code in a steady, hypnotic crawl, the other frozen on a grainy traffic cam image. He didn't look up. Marla sat in the armchair by the far wall, knees pulled tight to her chest. The shadows made her seem smaller, like she was folding in on herself. Kane guessed she'd been holding her breath for hours. "What happened?" Patch asked, his voice low, fingers still dancing over the keys. Kane crossed the room, set his pistol down on the table with a quiet thud. "Mendez didn't make it. Did he talk?" Vera asked from the doorway. "Enough to get himself killed for it." Kane picked up a rag from the counter, wiped his hands slowly. The dark smear it left was more brown than red under the lamp, but it still carried the weight of fresh loss. "And he gave me 2 things, the wolf, and the words behind the badge." Patch's typing slowed. "Behind the badge? You mean exactly what it sounds like," Kane said. "Someone wearing one. Could be a beat cop, could be brass, could be higher than that." For a moment, no one said anything. The only sound was the rain brushing against the glass, soft but relentless, like the city was whispering warnings they couldn't quite hear. They turned the phrase over and over for the next hour. Mendez's words were simple, but the implications were elaborate. The wolf wasn't just a ghost in the underworld. He was in the halls where justice was supposed to live. And that meant he had eyes everywhere. That'd be why midnight. Kane couldn't take the stillness anymore. He stood, stretched his shoulders, reached for his coat. "Where are you going?" Vera asked. To see a man about a ghost, Kane said that Lang's building still smelled the way Kane remembered. Faint mildew from the laundromat downstairs, and something sharper, like old smoke ground into the plaster. The retired detective lived on the fourth floor in a narrow apartment with a balcony that hadn't been safe to stand on for a decade. Kane found him in the hallway, juggling a paper bag of groceries. The old man's face cracked into a half smile. "Silas Kane. Haven't seen you since you decided the rules didn't apply to you." "Some rules don't," Kane said, taking the bag without being asked. Inside, Lang's apartment looked like it had been assembled from the contents of evidence rooms no one cared about anymore. Battered file cabinets, stacks of news clippings, corkboards with yellowing notes still pinned to them. Kane didn't waste time. "You ever hear of someone called the Wolf?" Lang froze with a carton of milk halfway to the fridge. His voice went flat. "You don't want to be asking that question." "I already did," Kane said, and Mendez dived for answering. Lang's eyes narrowed. He shut the fridge slowly. "You think the Wolf's just another crime boss? You're wrong. He doesn't run one corner of the city. He runs the game. Cops, judges, politicians, maybe some people whose names you'd only see on election night." "And behind the badge?" Kane asked. That Lang's expression hardened into something Kane remembered from the old days. The look of a man who knew where the bodies were buried and wished he didn't. "If you're asking me to confirm a mole in the force, I'm not doing it. I've lived long enough to know what happens when you start naming names." Kane didn't move. He just held Lang's gaze until the older man sighed and shuffled to a battered filing cabinet. He pulled a manila envelope from the bottom drawer, the paper soft at the edges from age. He handed it over without ceremony. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed and brittle. Inked in the center was a stylized wolf's head, its eyes empty circles. Beneath it, typed in clean, mechanical letters, "Blood letter." "What is this?" Kane asked. Lang lit a cigarette with hands that shook more than they used to. "That's a ghost story the wrong kind of people tell each other. Every target gets a blood letter before they're taken out. Never the same delivery twice. Sometimes it's an envelope, sometimes a mark left at the scene, but always that symbol. And if you get one," he trailed off, blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "No one's ever seen a second." Back at the safe house, the sheet drew them all in. Vera leaned on the table, tracing the wolf's head without touching it. "Blood letter. Sounds like a warning. Or a promise," Marla said quietly. Patch was already at his keyboard. "Let's see if we can cross-reference it. Gangs, cartels, organized crime," he frowned. "That's interesting. The symbols in the database. But the file's sealed. Clearance level we're not supposed to know exists." "Can you get in?" Kane asked. Patch gave a dry smile. "I could get anywhere. Just tell me how fast you want it." It took until after 2 a.m. to plan it. The server was inside a government building downtown, the kind that didn't appear on any city plans. The plan was simple on paper, but paper didn't account for the way the air changes when you're somewhere you don't belong. They moved through the rain like shadows that didn't want to be seen. Kane led, Vera on his shoulder, Marla trailing with a camera slung under her coat, Patch carrying the gear. The building rose out of the mist like a ship at sea, all dark glass and concrete edges. Inside, the silence was heavy. Carpet muffled their steps. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead seemed too loud. Every corner they turned felt like flipping a coin. They might not get to flip back. In the records room. Patch worked the terminal while Kane kept watch at the door. The screens reflected off his glasses, turning his eyes into pools of green code. "I'm in," Patch whispered finally. "The bloodletter file, it's a kill list. High-value targets, all dead. Every death looks accidental unless you put them side by side. and the last name on the list. He turned the monitor toward Kane.it was his own. Date of birth. Photo. Case number. And a blank where the date of death should be. Before Kane could speak, the lights cut out. The room glowed red as emergency strobes kicked in. Somewhere down the hall, a siren began to howl. "They know we're here," Vera hissed. They moved fast. Kane led them through the corridors, doubling back twice to shake the sound of boots closing in. They found a side stairwell, took it 3 flights down to a loading dock. A shadow moved in the doorway ahead, a guard, rifle up. Kane dropped him with 2 sharp shots, the sound swallowed by the siren's wail. Outside, the rain was waiting for them, cold and merciless. Back at the safe house, no one spoke for a long time. Kane sat with the blood-letter sheet on his knees, the wolf's head staring back at him. The wolf wasn't just aware of him. He'd marked him. The symbol wasn't a threat. It was a scheduled event. The others began arguing in low voices about their next move. Kane barely heard them. His thoughts were already somewhere else. Not in the room, not even in the city. They were out there, in the space between the wolf's shadow and the badge that hid him. Kane slid the sheet into his coat pocket, stood, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Vera asked. "To write a letter of my own," Kane said. The door closed behind him. The rain didn't stop.